They say every neighborhood has that one person who thinks the rules don't apply to them. For me, it wasn't some distant stranger. It was the HOA president herself. And the way she used my driveway, it felt less like an inconvenience and more like a violation. It started early in the mornings, just as the sun was barely tipping over the roofs. I'd hear it, the low growl of a BMW engine rolling down my street, too fast for a neighborhood where kids played on bikes. Then the crunch of tires on gravel, not on the road. On my driveway, she sweep across it like it was a public lane, the sharp blast of her horn sending my kids scrambling to pull their bikes aside, their little faces confused, almost frightened. That horn didn't belong here. That car didn't belong here. The first few times I thought maybe she was in a hurry, maybe it was a one-off. We all make mistakes, right? But then it became a pattern. Morning, evening, sometimes in the middle of the day if traffic backed up on the main road. And it wasn't just her anymore. Friends, visitors, even delivery vans following her lead. My driveway had turned into a shortcut, a back alley to save Linda Chen, our HOA president, a few minutes on her commute. Linda didn't just drive through, she did it like she owned the place. Windows down, sunglasses on, waving casually like she was granting me the privilege of her presence. And that BMW, silver, polished, the kind that catches the morning light and blinds you for a second, it became the symbol of something bigger than trespassing. It was entitlement, pure and simple. I still remember one Saturday morning, stepping outside in my old boots, the laces frayed, dust clinging to the edges from the week's work. The air smelled of wet grass, the kind that sticks to your clothes after mowing. I was halfway to the mailbox when Linda's car rolled up again, unbothered, honking at my youngest to move his little red bike. My boy froze, tiny hands gripping the handlebars like maybe if he didn't move, she'd have to stop. But no, she honked again, sharper this time, her nails tapping on the wheel in impatience. My chest tightened in a way I can't quite describe. I waved her down, tried to keep it civil. "Linda, could you not use my driveway like that? The kids." She cut me off, laughing like it was the funniest misunderstanding. "Oh, don't worry. As community president, I've got easement rights. Your drive connects to HOA property. Semi-public space. Totally fine." Her words stung, not just because they were wrong, I knew they were, but because she said them with that condescending smile. The kind of smile that tells you she doesn't see you as an equal, but as someone in her way. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it again. The tires crunching on gravel, the horn blaring, my kids scattering like her presence mattered more than their safety. I laid there in the dark, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun slow and steady, whispering its quiet hum. And all I could think was, how far is she going to push this? It didn't take long to find out. One afternoon, I came home to find something that stopped me cold. At first, I thought it was a joke, maybe some prank by the neighborhood kids, but no. There, at the edge of my driveway, stood 3 cars I didn't recognize, all lined up, engines off, people inside sipping coffee, scrolling through phones like they were waiting for something. A minute later, Linda's BMW rolled up. She leaned out the window, collected a few dollar bills from the driver of the first car, and waved him forward, onto my property. It was like a punch in the gut. She wasn't just trespassing anymore, she was charging admission. My driveway had become her personal toll road. I remember standing there, keys still in my hand, the metal biting into my palm, my boots rooted to the gravel. Watching strangers drive across the space where my kids played basketball, where I washed my truck on Sundays, where I shoveled snow every winter. And Linda, she just pocketed the cash, smiling like a queen running her kingdom. That was the moment something inside me shifted. I wasn't just annoyed anymore. I wasn't even angry, I was done. Because here's the thing, I wasn't just some random homeowner. I was a civil engineer. And while Linda thought she had turned my driveway into her shortcut, she had no idea that I had the tools, the knowledge, and the patience to end this in a way she'd never see coming. That night, long after the engines quieted and the street grew still, I sat at my kitchen table with a sketch pad. The sound of the old gate creaking in the wind drifted in through the cracked window. My pencil moved slow at first, then quicker, sharper. Each line, each circle wasn't just a drawing, it was a plan. Linda thought she had a road, but I was about to give her a road she'd never forget. You ever have one of those nights where your brain just won't let you rest? That was me, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at the sketches I'd drawn. I could hear the faint buzz of crickets outside, the creak of that old wooden gate every time the wind shifted. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, then silence again. Linda had no idea what she'd woken up in me. I wasn't just defending my driveway anymore. I was defending my home, my kids, my peace. And as I traced over the lines of my plan, I felt a calm settle in. The kind of calm that comes right before you do something permanent. By sunrise, my decision was made. I pulled on my boots, the ones still dusted from last week's site visit, and headed out. The gravel crunched under my feet, dew soaking into the edges of my jeans. Standing at the end of the driveway, I imagined it, not the shortcut Linda thought she owned, but the barrier I was about to build. Strong, beautiful, untouchable. See, I'd already placed the order. 2 tons of decorative boulders. Not just random rocks, carefully chosen, each one a different size and texture, the kind that landscapers charge a fortune to install in fancy gardens. To anyone else, it would look like art. To me, it was armor. The delivery was scheduled for Tuesday morning. That gave me 2 days to prepare. 2 long days where I had to watch Linda roll across my driveway like nothing was wrong. And oh, she didn't waste a single chance to remind me. Monday evening, just as the sun dipped behind the rooftops and the streetlights flickered on, I heard that BMW again. The low purr of the engine, the squeal of brakes. She didn't even slow down this time. She cut across the drive with one hand on the wheel and the other holding her phone, laughing at something on her screen. My youngest was out front, bouncing a basketball, and she barely missed him. I swear my heart stopped in that moment. The sound of the ball thudding against the pavement, his startled face as the wind from her car brushed past him. And her? Not even a glance. Not even a flicker of acknowledgement. Just gone, back onto the road like my property was nothing more than an extension of her commute. I didn't sleep that night either. Not out of planning this time, but out of rage. When Tuesday came, I was ready. The rumble of the delivery truck echoed down the street before the sun was fully up. Neighbors peeked out their curtains, curious about what could possibly require such a load. The truck pulled in, brakes hissing, and the driver climbed down. "Got a big order here," he said, patting the side of the trailer. I pointed to the driveway. "Right there, let's make it count." The next few hours felt almost like therapy. One by one, the boulders came off. Some were small enough for me to wrestle into place with a crowbar. Others took machinery, each thud as they landed shaking the ground beneath my boots. 47 of them in total, each weighing anywhere from 200 to 800 pounds. But I wasn't just dumping rocks. No, this was art. I measured, adjusted, shifted, angled them in a way that left just enough space for a person to walk through, but not a single vehicle could hope to pass. From the street, it looked like a carefully designed stone garden, almost too perfect to question. But to Linda, it would be something else entirely, a wall she couldn't buy her way through. By late morning, sweat clung to my shirt, dust caked on my arms, and my hands were raw from gripping tools. But when I stepped back and looked at it, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: satisfaction. My driveway wasn't just mine again. It was untouchable. I didn't have to wait long for the payoff. At exactly 7:43 a.m., like clockwork, the silver BMW appeared at the corner. I was leaning against my porch post, sipping from a bottle of water when she turned in. She didn't even notice at first. Her music thumped through the speakers, windows down, sunglasses perched like she was on parade. Then the brake lights flared. She stopped dead at the entrance. Her face, I'll never forget it. First confusion, then disbelief, then the kind of anger that makes a person's jaw tighten until you think their teeth might crack. She slammed the gear into park, threw the door open, and marched straight up my drive. "What is this?" she snapped, gesturing wildly at the boulders. "You can't block community access. This is a violation." I let her rant, her voice cutting through the quiet morning air. Neighbors started to gather, standing at their mailboxes, pretending not to watch but unable to look away. Her BMW sat stranded, half on the road, half in my drive, looking more like a trapped animal than the proud machine she flaunted every day. Finally, I spoke, calm, steady, almost too steady. It's landscaping, decorative stone, got the receipts if you'd like to see. Her face twisted, disbelief written all over it. She kicked at the gravel, muttering about easements, about community rights, about safety hazards. But every word fell flat. Because standing there with those 47 boulders behind me, I knew she couldn't touch me. And for the first time, I saw it in her eyes, the realization. She wasn't in control anymore. That morning, my driveway stopped being her shortcut. It became her dead end. You'd think the sight of those boulders would have been enough to stop her, to humble her, maybe even embarrass her into retreat. But no, if there's one thing about people like Linda, it's that they don't back down when they're wrong. They double down. She stood there red-faced, arms crossed tight, her voice carrying across the neighborhood like a siren. This is illegal. You can't just barricade community property. Community property, that phrase again. It was like her shield, a magic spell she thought would bend reality. By then, 3 more cars had pulled up behind her BMW, all expecting the shortcut. They idled awkwardly, engines humming, drivers craning their necks to see what the holdup was. When they realized, I could see the irritation on their faces. One guy in a pickup even honked, not realizing he was honking at the president herself. And Linda, she snapped. She spun on her heels, marched back to her car, and yanked her phone out. The way her nails clacked against the screen, you could almost hear the fury in every tap. Moments later, she was shouting into the receiver, packing back and forth. I couldn't make out all of it, but one phrase cut clear through the morning air. Public safety hazard. I leaned against the porch railing, arms folded, and waited. My kids peeked from behind the curtains inside, wide-eyed, whispering questions I didn't have answers for. Neighbors lingered at their mailboxes, pretending to check envelopes that were probably empty. It felt like the whole street had been holding its breath. It didn't take long for the police cruiser to arrive. The sound of its tires rolling up was different, steady, deliberate, the kind that quiets a crowd. An officer stepped out, sunglasses on, scanning the scene. He was tall, broad-shouldered, the type who didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. Linda rushed to him immediately, hands flailing, pointing at me at the boulders at her car stuck half in my driveway. He's blocking access. This is dangerous. It's a violation of easement rights. He can't just do this. The officer listened, nodding slightly, but his face stayed unreadable. When she finished, he walked over to me. His boots crunched against the gravel, and for a moment, all I could hear was the soft click of his radio at his shoulder. "Morning," he said, calm, professional. "Mind telling me what's going on here?" I handed him the folder I'd already prepared. Receipts, permits, the landscaping plan, all neat, all stamped, all legal. Decorative stone installation, I explained. Completely within code, I made sure of it. He flipped through the papers, lips twitching like he wanted to smile but was holding it back. After a long pause, he looked over at Linda, who was standing there with her arms still crossed, foot tapping like she was about to explode. "Ma'am," the officer said evenly, "this is landscaping, perfectly legal. He's within his rights." The silence that followed was almost sweet. You could feel it ripple through the onlookers. Linda's face drained of color, then flushed deep red again. She opened her mouth, shut it, opened it again. Finally, she sputtered, but it's blocking emergency access." The officer turned back to me. "Is there space for foot traffic?" 18 inches between each boulder, I replied. "Enough for people to walk through, no vehicle access." He nodded. "That's compliant." And that was it, case closed. Linda let out a sound somewhere between a scoff and a growl, stormed back to her BMW, and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the frame. She sat there for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, before finally throwing the car into reverse and backing out. The other drivers behind her scattered like a flock of startled birds. But even as she left, I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. That evening, as the crickets started up again and the sky turned that soft purple just before nightfall, I heard the crunch of footsteps on my driveway. My neighbor, old Mr. Jensen, shuffled up, his plaid shirt tucked into jeans that had seen better days. He squinted at the boulders, nodded slowly, and then looked at me. "Smart," he said, his voice gravelly. "Real smart, but she ain't gonna let it go, you know that, right?" I nodded, taking a slow sip of the coffee in my hand. The steam curled up into the cooling air. "Yeah," I said quietly, "I know." And I was right. Because the very next day, a bright orange notice fluttered on my mailbox. HOA violation, claiming my landscaping was non-compliant, that it disrupted community harmony. Harmony. That word made me laugh out loud. Linda was escalating. If the police couldn't tear my boulders down, maybe the HOA could. But what she didn't realize was that she was stepping into my world now. The world of codes, regulations, and structural compliance. And I knew it better than anyone. The notice flapped against my mailbox in the breeze like some kind of taunt. Bright orange paper, bold black letters, violation. I pulled it off, the tape leaving a sticky residue on the metal. Standing there in the quiet of the morning, I read every word. Non-compliant landscaping, disruption of community access. Fine, $150, payable within 30 days. I couldn't help but laugh under my breath. The absurdity of it all. The HOA president trespasses on my property, charges neighbors like she's running a toll road, and now she's fining me for blocking her scheme. But beneath the humor, I felt something else. Not anger, not fear, determination. That night, I spread the violation letter across the kitchen table, the same table where I'd drawn my sketches. My kids were asleep upstairs, their muffled laughter from earlier still lingering in my ears. I thought of them every time I saw Linda's car. I thought of that horn blaring, their bikes scattered, their faces pale. This wasn't about fines or letters. It was about standing my ground. I pulled out the HOA charter, the thick binder every homeowner got when they moved in, the one most people shoved in a drawer and never looked at again. But I read it like scripture. Line after line, clause after clause, and there it was, plain as day. Natural stone landscaping is encouraged as part of aesthetic beautification. Encouraged, not restricted, not banned, encouraged. I smiled, leaned back in my chair, and let the satisfaction wash over me. Linda hadn't even checked her own rule book. The next HOA meeting came that Thursday. It was held in the community center, that squat brick building that always smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Folding chairs scraped against the floor as neighbors trickled in. Some greeted me with cautious nods, others with knowing smirks. Word had already spread about the rock wall. Linda sat at the front, posture rigid, gavel in hand like she was running a courtroom instead of a neighborhood. Her BMW keys glinted on the table beside her, as if to remind everyone exactly who she was. When my name came up on the agenda, she didn't waste a second. "This homeowner," she began, her voice sharp, "has installed unauthorized obstructions that violate our community's safety standards. We cannot allow personal landscaping choices to endanger emergency vehicle access." A few heads nodded, but most stayed still. I could feel the tension in the room, like everyone was waiting for me to crumble. I stood, papers in hand, and spoke clearly, calmly. With respect, the HOA Charter specifically encourages natural stone landscaping. Section 4, Paragraph C. I followed every city code. My design allows for pedestrian access, complies with all fire regulations, and... I paused, letting my gaze settle on Linda. Does not interfere with any public right-of-way because my driveway is not and has never been public. I laid the documents on the table, receipts, permits, copies of the charter itself. Neighbors leaned forward, eyes darting between the papers and Linda's face. For the first time I saw it, the crack in her armor, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. She recovered quickly, slamming the gavel down. "This isn't about technicalities," she snapped. "It's about community spirit, harmony, cooperation." The word hung in the air, hollow. Even the board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The silence spoke louder than any argument. After the meeting, as people filed out, I caught snippets of conversation. "Smart move using the stones. She really overstepped this time. Can you believe she charged people to use his driveway?" The tide was shifting, and Linda knew it. But she wasn't finished. A week later, I came home to find another envelope taped to my door. This one wasn't from the HOA. It was from a law firm. A cease and desist letter demanding immediate removal of the boulders or face legal action. For a moment I felt that old knot in my stomach tighten. A lawyer. This was different. This was bigger. I sat on the porch steps, letter in hand, the evening sun dipping low, shadows stretching across the lawn. I thought about what it would mean: court dates, expenses, the stress of dragging my family through a legal fight. And for just a second, doubt crept in. But then I remembered something important. I wasn't just a homeowner. I wasn't just some guy with rocks in his driveway. I was a civil engineer. I lived in the world of codes and compliance. I knew how to read property surveys like a map, how to see the invisible lines that defined ownership. And Linda, she was bluffing. I spent the next few nights digging through my property records, highlighter in hand, coffee keeping me awake long after midnight. The survey was crystal clear. The driveway was entirely within my lot. No easements, no access rights, no loopholes. When her lawyer finally called to negotiate, I faxed him the survey with a single note. Trespassing for profit is a criminal offense. Would you like me to file charges against your client? Silence, then a quick backpedal, and just like that, the legal threat crumbled. But Linda, she wasn't crumbling, not yet. If anything, her desperation was sharpening. I could feel it in the way she glared at me when our paths crossed, the way she gripped her steering wheel a little tighter as she passed my house. The battle wasn't over, it was just changing shape. Sometimes battles aren't won in big moments. They're won in whispers, in sideways glances, in the quiet turning of a tide. And in the weeks that followed, I started to notice that tide shifting. It began small. A neighbor pausing on his evening walk, stopping at the edge of my driveway. He bent down, ran his hand over one of the boulders, nodded once, and kept moving. Another time, a mother with her toddler in tow slowed, pointing to the stones like they were part of some neighborhood attraction. "See, pretty rocks," she told her child, smiling faintly in my direction. Word spread. My driveway wasn't a shortcut anymore. It was a landmark. But Linda, she couldn't stand it. Her BMW no longer swept through with arrogance. It idled, lingered. Sometimes I'd catch her parked across the street, engine running, sunglasses hiding her eyes as she stared at the stone garden like it was a personal insult carved into the earth. And then came the letters, not official ones this time. Anonymous notes slipped into my mailbox, scrawled in messy handwriting. "Selfish. You're dividing the community. You'll regret this." I knew who sent them. Or at least I knew who inspired them. It all boiled over one Saturday morning. The air was crisp, the sky pale blue, the kind of day that makes you want to linger outside just to soak it in. I was out front with a rake, pulling leaves into piles when I heard it. The slam of a car door, the sharp click of heels on pavement. Linda was marching straight toward me. "You think you've won, don't you?" she hissed, stopping just short of the boulder line. "You think you can humiliate me? You've divided this neighborhood with your fortress." I rested the rake against my shoulder, wiped the sweat from my brow, and met her gaze. Calm, even. "I built a garden, you turned it into a battlefield." Her face twisted, fury and frustration tangled together. For a moment I thought she might actually step forward, try to push past the stones. But she didn't. Instead, she turned sharply, shouting over her shoulder to the handful of neighbors who'd paused to watch. "This is what happens when one person thinks they're above the community. He's selfish, arrogant, impossible to work with. And if you let him win, none of you will be safe from people like him." The silence that followed was deafening. All eyes flicked toward me, waiting. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I simply leaned the rake against the porch and said quietly, "Ask yourselves who's been trespassing, who's been charging you to drive across property she doesn't own. Ask yourselves who really divided this community." And then I walked back inside, leaving the question hanging in the air like smoke. That night, as the streetlights buzzed and the neighborhood settled into its evening quiet, I got a knock at the door. It was my neighbor Jensen again, cap in hand, his lined face serious. "Thought you should know," he said, his voice low. "HOA board's been talking. People are tired of her. Real tired. This stunt with the lawyer, that didn't sit right with anyone. You keep your head steady, son. She's burning her own house down." I thanked him, but even as I closed the door, I couldn't shake the unease. Because desperate people don't fade quietly. They flare up before they go out. And Linda was about to flare. The next HOA meeting was packed. More neighbors than I'd ever seen crowded into the community center, folding chairs scraping, voices buzzing. I could feel the tension, the anticipation. Linda opened the meeting with fire in her voice. This board will not tolerate rogue behavior. We are a community, not a collection of individuals doing whatever they please. Her words were sharp, but the room was different this time. Restless, distrustful, people whispered, shifted, shook their heads. When she brought up my violation again, I stood, not with papers this time, but with a simple statement. I have lived here for years. I've mowed my lawn, shoveled snow, helped neighbors when their pipes burst, watched their kids when they were running late. I've respected this community. All I asked was the same respect in return. And when I didn't get it, I defended what was mine, legally, fairly, permanently. That's not division, that's dignity. The room was silent. And then slowly applause, not thunderous, not overwhelming, but steady, enough. Linda's face went pale, her gavel trembled in her hand, and for the first time I saw it clearly, she was losing. But losing people like her, it only made them more dangerous. It's strange watching someone unravel in slow motion. At first it's subtle, a sharp word here, a hasty decision there. But then it's like the mask slips and the truth comes pouring out. For Linda, the mask slipped fast. After that HOA meeting, after the applause that wasn't meant for her, she changed. The confident wave from her BMW disappeared. The sunglasses stayed on longer, her jaw clenched tighter. And instead of driving through my driveway, she drove slower past my house, staring at the boulders like they were mocking her. Then the rumors started. She's saying you blocked an ambulance once. My neighbor Sarah whispered to me one morning, clutching her coffee like it was a lifeline. Claims the EMTs had to reroute because of your fortress. I almost laughed, almost. But the idea that she would drag something as serious as an ambulance into her lies, it chilled me. That wasn't just petty anymore, that was dangerous. 2 days later, another rumor surfaced. This time, she claimed I'd built the Boulder garden to drive down property values, that I was planning to sell and profit off the chaos. It was absurd. Anyone who looked at the street could see the opposite. Kids playing tag around the stones, neighbors pointing them out to visitors, even a few families asking me for advice on how to design their own. But lies have a way of sticking, even when they're thin. The breaking point came one Friday evening. I was tightening the hinges on my old wooden gate, the one that creaked every time the wind picked up, when I noticed a group gathering near the community center. Flashlights, clipboards, raised voices. Linda was in the middle, pointing toward my property like she was leading a witch hunt. I walked over, boots crunching against gravel, dust still on my hands from the gate. "Something I can help you with?" I asked, keeping my tone even. Linda whipped around, her face flushed under the streetlight. "We're conducting a safety inspection," she announced, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Your boulders are a liability if a fire truck needed access." "Already cleared with the fire marshal," I interrupted, pulling the folded certification from my back pocket. I'd carried it for weeks, knowing she'd try this angle eventually. I held it out. "Signed, dated, approved." The murmurs started then. Neighbors leaning closer, whispering, shaking their heads. Someone even chuckled under their breath. Linda's hand trembled as she snatched the paper, scanning it with wild eyes. This doesn't change the fact that it's ugly, disruptive, and legal," I said firmly, reclaiming the paper. "Completely legal. You can keep pushing, Linda, but all you're doing is proving you've got nothing left." Her mouth opened like she wanted to shout, but the words never came. Instead, she spun on her heels, storming back to her BMW. The slam of her door echoed through the night. That was the moment I knew she was finished. But endings aren't clean, they're messy, and Linda wasn't going to go quietly. The following week, she tried one last move. A letter slipped under every door in the neighborhood. Bold, dramatic, dripping with desperation. "Our community is under threat. If we allow selfish individuals to wall themselves off, what will become of our shared values? Do not let one man's arrogance destroy our harmony." It was signed, of course, with her title, HOA president. I sat on my porch that night, the letter crumpled in my hand, listening to the faint hum of cicadas. Across the street, I watched neighbors gather in small groups, holding their copies, shaking their heads. Some laughed, some cursed under their breath. Mr. Jensen wandered over, his old boots leaving prints in the dust. He dropped his copy on the step beside me. "She's done," he said simply. "People are fed up. That letter, it's the last straw." And he was right. By the next HOA meeting, the room was packed again. But this time, the whispers weren't nervous. They were sharp, angry. People demanded answers, not from me, but from her. Why was she spreading lies? Why was she abusing her position? Why had she turned private property into her personal toll road? Linda tried to fight back, tried to wave her gavel, to raise her voice, to drown out the rising tide. But it was no use. Every word out of her mouth just dug the hole deeper. I didn't need to speak. I didn't need to defend myself. The community was doing it for me. And as I sat there, arms folded, watching her grip the gavel like it was the only thing keeping her afloat, I realized something important. This was never just about my driveway. It was about power, about respect, about the line between authority and abuse. And once you cross that line, once people see the truth, there's no going back. Linda's empire was crumbling, and the Boulders, they weren't just blocking her shortcut anymore. They were the symbol of everything she couldn't control. The thing about power is, it doesn't vanish all at once. It cracks, it splinters, and then one day it shatters so completely you wonder how it ever held together in the first place. For Linda, that shattering came on a gray Thursday evening. The air was heavy, rain threatening on the horizon, the kind of weather that makes everything feel tense. The community center was packed again, standing room only this time. You could feel the anticipation before the meeting even began, neighbors shifting in their folding chairs, whispers cutting sharp through the stale air. Linda walked in late, her BMW keys clutched in her fist like a weapon. She tried to hold her head high, but the weight of weeks of backlash showed in the tightness of her shoulders, the tremor in her hands. She sat at the head of the table, gavel poised, but the authority she once carried, it was gone. The meeting started as usual, committee updates, minor issues, but everyone was waiting. You could feel it, like the room was holding its breath. And then, finally, a neighbor stood. Mrs. Alvarez, quiet, soft-spoken, the kind of woman who rarely raised her voice. She held up a copy of Linda's fear-mongering letter, her hands trembling slightly. "Enough," she said, her voice cracking but firm. "We're tired of the lies, we're tired of the bullying. This isn't leadership, it's abuse. And I, for one, don't trust you to represent us anymore." The room erupted, not in chaos, but in steady, determined agreement. One by one, neighbors stood. Words spilled out. Frustration, anger, stories of intimidation, moments where Linda had crossed lines none of us had even known about. Each voice added weight, and together they built something undeniable, a demand for change. Linda tried to fight back. She slammed the gavel, shouted about bylaws, tried to talk over the crowd. But her voice cracked, her words faltered. Every swing of that gavel sounded more desperate than the last. And the more she fought, the more the crowd pushed back. Finally, someone called the motion, a vote of no confidence. The phrase hung in the air like a thunderclap. Papers shuffled, hands raised, eyes locked. The result wasn't even close. Overwhelming, unmistakable. Linda Chen was out. The gavel slipped from her hand and clattered against the table, echoing in the stunned silence that followed. She stood there for a moment, frozen, as if the ground beneath her had given way. And then, without a word, she grabbed her keys, stormed out, and slammed the door so hard the walls rattled. The room didn't cheer. There was no celebration, no gloating, just a quiet, collective exhale. Relief. When I stepped outside into the damp evening air, I saw her BMW parked crooked under the streetlight. She sat inside, staring straight ahead, hands gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. For just a second, our eyes met through the glass. And I didn't see power anymore. I didn't see arrogance. I saw someone who had lost everything she thought defined her. She peeled out moments later, taillights disappearing into the night. In the days that followed, the neighborhood felt different, lighter somehow. People lingered outside longer, conversations stretched across driveways, kids played without fear of horns blasting at them. The Boulder garden that had once been a battleground was now a centerpiece. Neighbors pointed it out to visitors, laughing about how it had started as revenge but ended up as art. Mr. Jensen came by one afternoon leaning on his cane, a grin tugging at his weathered face. "Never thought I'd see the day," he chuckled. "She thought she owned this place. Guess those rocks told a different story." I smiled, running a hand over the rough surface of one of the boulders. It was warm in the afternoon sun, solid, immovable, just the way I'd intended. But even in the victory, I couldn't shake a certain heaviness. Watching Linda unravel hadn't been fun. It hadn't been satisfying the way I once thought it might be. There was something almost sad about it. A reminder that power, when abused, doesn't just hurt the people it's aimed at. It consumes the person wielding it too. And maybe that was the real lesson. Sometimes the strongest revenge isn't loud. It isn't about winning arguments or shouting the longest. Sometimes it's about building something so solid, so undeniable, that no one can ever move it again. The boulders weren't just stone. They were proof that boundaries matter, that dignity matters, that standing your ground quietly, firmly, can speak louder than any gavel. But Linda's story wasn't quite over yet. Because within months, her BMW disappeared from our streets for good. The house went up for sale. And the woman who once thought she could run this neighborhood like her own kingdom, she was gone, leaving nothing behind but memories, and the reminder of what happens when entitlement meets immovable stone. The for sale sign went up quietly, almost like she was hopping no one would notice. A simple white post hammered into the lawn, the bold red letters catching the morning light. But of course, everyone noticed. Neighbors whispered about it during evening walks. Kids on bikes slowed down just to look. Even the mailman paused longer than usual, shaking his head as he slid envelopes into the box. Linda's house, once the center of so much noise, so much authority, so much control, was suddenly just another property on the market. For weeks I'd catch glimpses of her, loading boxes into the back of her BMW, shoulders hunched, eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. She didn't wave anymore. Didn't shout orders or make small talk, just kept her head down, moving quickly like she couldn't get away fast enough. The day the moving truck came, the street was unusually quiet. No kids playing, no neighbors chatting. Just the groan of the truck's ramp, the thud of furniture, the scrape of boxes sliding across metal. I stood on my porch, arms folded, watching in silence. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel glee. What I felt was harder to name. Relief, yes, but also a kind of sorrow. Because the truth is, Linda didn't have to be the villain. She could have been a leader. She could have built community instead of tearing it down. But somewhere along the way, she chose control over cooperation, entitlement over respect. And once you choose that path, it doesn't matter how shiny your car is or how loud your voice carries, you're building on sand. By sunset, the BMW was gone. The moving truck rolled away. And for the first time in years, the street felt still. That night, I walked out to the Boulder garden. The air was cool, the sky scattered with stars, the faint hum of crickets carrying across the yards. I ran my hand over the surface of one of the stones, rough and solid under my palm. This garden had started as revenge, a way to stop the trespassing, to protect my family, to draw a line no one could cross. But over time, it had become more than that. Kids used it as an obstacle course. Neighbors showed it off to visitors. Some even asked me for advice on building their own. It wasn't just a wall, it was a reminder. A reminder that boundaries matter, that respect matters, that when you stand your ground, calmly, legally, quietly, you don't just protect yourself. You teach others that dignity can be stronger than arrogance. In the months that followed, the neighborhood changed. Conversations grew warmer longer. People seemed more willing to listen to each other, to laugh, to forgive. The new HOA president, a level-headed man named Harris, stopped by one afternoon, extending a hand. "Thanks," he said simply. "You didn't just solve your problem, you solved ours. You showed us what happens when someone abuses their power, and what it looks like when someone pushes back the right way." I shook his hand, nodding. No speeches, No victory laps, just quiet acknowledgement. Because here's the thing, life isn't about crushing your enemies. It's not about proving you're right louder than someone else can prove you're wrong. Sometimes life is about patience, about finding a solution that doesn't just end a problem but makes it impossible for that problem to return. Linda thought she had a shortcut. She thought she could bend rules, bend people, bend truth. But in the end, it wasn't me who beat her. It was the weight of her own choices, crashing down harder than any boulder I ever placed. Today, when I walk past those stones, I don't see revenge anymore. I see resilience. I see community. I see a story that started with anger but ended with peace. And maybe that's the real lesson. Sometimes the strongest boundaries aren't fences or walls. They're values. Sometimes the loudest victory isn't shouting or gloating. It's the quiet hum of crickets in a neighborhood finally at rest. Linda's gone. The shortcut is gone. The toll booth, the lies, the gavel, all gone. But the boulders remain, solid, permanent, a reminder that dignity once claimed can't be moved. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one, the truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.